Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Erin. Erin is an activist, artist, and is the founder of Inner Shoes, Women of the Eighth, Facebook page and Instagram page, I believe, and art project. And she has recently completed also a book based on the project with stories of women affected by the Eighth Amendment in Ireland. And as we know, her page was extremely influential on social media during the repeal campaign. So I would like to ask Erin to give us a short presentation of the project and also how the book came about, and then we're going to have a discussion with her. Thank you so much, Erin, for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really honored to be part of this webinar series. So I wanted to keep my conversation as a conversation and as intimate and easy as possible. So I don't have any slides for you guys, and I'll be referring to my notes as well to cover as much ground as possible. So if you have any questions, I'll be talking for about 15 minutes, and then at the end, questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please make sure you write them down so that way we can get to them. I'd really like to be able to talk with you. So I am the creator of the grassroots project In Her Shoes, Women of the Eighth, which was a platform telling the anonymous and negative impacts of the Eighth Amendment to people in Ireland. It started in January 2018, which was 5 months before a referendum vote, and it has since been published as a book containing 32 consenting and anonymous contributor stories, as well as my own story to the book. I am a mother of 3. I'm an artist living in Galway, and I'm an immigrant from the United States. I'm originally from Oklahoma, which is a conservative, I got a cat here, conservative, evangelical, and Republican state, where abortion is legal with very little access. There's 3 places in Oklahoma where you can get an abortion and a population of 4 million. So it's similar in size to Ireland. In Oklahoma, where I'm from, telemedicine is prohibited. Planned Parenthood is being defunded by the US government, and women travel hundreds of miles out of state or within the state, and abortion is still a taboo topic in America as well. I came to Ireland in 2006 when I was 18 and just out of school. I got married, and I didn't know anything about the law in Ireland, anything about abortion. It didn't really impact me because I just wanted to be pregnant. I was pro-choice, and then I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is really, really common, but it can prevent women from getting pregnant or make it difficult for them to get pregnant. So when I was seeking fertility help was the first time I ever recognized the imposing nature of the Catholic Church on my reproductive health. So I'm sure that most, if not all, first-time Irish mothers would understand that when they enter into the maternity system in Ireland, that it's can be very intimidating. There's full of a lot of unknowns, but you just go with it because you expect that if you need help, you'll get it. As an immigrant in the maternity system, it's set up entirely different to what I was expecting. And I imagine for other immigrants as well from their own home countries. There is no sense of autonomy in care, and there's no sense of, there's no continuous care either. So I had researched, and I had become pregnant, and I had researched what kind of birth I could have, what my options were in Ireland. And I realized that I didn't really have any options, and I had to just go with what was there. So I gave birth in 2010, and it was when I gave birth and breastfeeding my daughter that awoke feminism within me. It opened this fire in my belly, because in Ireland has the lowest breastfeeding rates within the EU. And so breastfeeding here is an uphill battle. There is the incredible dairy industry, which is government and has government investment. The medical institution is the uphill battle against the medical institution for accurate information and support. A battle with society norms. It's a social taboo. And at the time, I had never seen a woman in Ireland breastfeeding in public. So I had been invited, my daughter was probably 6 months old, and I had been invited to an online private Facebook group. It was for extended breastfeeders in Ireland, which is funny because in Ireland, extended breastfeeding would be anything over 6 weeks, whereas the WHO standards is anything after 2 years is considered extended breastfeeding. So this group, though, was a group of women who were going against the grain. They were accidental activists. They were advocating for themselves and for others, standing up against hypocrisy in our medical system, in our government. But really, they were just feeding their babies. It was very simple. And if you are interested in learning about just, you know, like as women's studies and learning about the history, historical part of this, reading the book Politics of Breastfeeding would be a really good start for you, even if you're not interested in breastfeeding or having a child. But in this group, we shared our ups and downs, our birth stories, and it became a really intimate gathering of over 1,000 women. But you know, 1,000 women is a lot, but it was very, very intimate. And that's what's fundamental to a fundamental element to our community are these shared spaces, and we've missed out on them with our modern way of living. So we lose out on intimacy and shared space, empathizing with each other's stories, learning from experiences, and gaining generational and ancestral knowledge. In these spaces, we heal our own old wounds, but really, women need to tell their stories. It's intrinsic to our evolution. We're hungry to share them, especially, sorry, this cat. Especially our blood stories, our menarche, sex, miscarriage, infertility, birth, abortion, and menopause. These are all transformative areas within our lived experience that are considered taboo in our societies. So imagine across Ireland, moms, women that have been feeling alone, and they're tethered instantly to other people in Ireland, knowing they're not alone. Their treatment in their pregnancies, birth, and postpartum is not singular. So with 9 women traveling daily from Ireland, outside of Ireland for an abortion, it was only a matter of time that a mother within our group would be facing the need for an abortion, the need for support, and the need to tell her story. Because 52% of people who access abortion are already parents. In 2012, I became pregnant with my second. It was in November that the news broke that a pregnant woman had died in Galway University Hospital. Savita Halappanavar was also due in March, the same time as me. And to say that news was shocking was a complete understatement. It wasn't just shocking for me, obviously. The entire country was completely devastated and shaken. I went to the vigil while I was pregnant. I was around 20 weeks pregnant, looking at images of her face, looking at her eyes, and thinking that could be me, and that could be any one of us, looking around this circle of people that come together. And I realized that being pregnant made me more vulnerable, and so was she. I was vulnerable within the healthcare system and within the country, and that I realized that if I needed help, well, would I get it? Would I have to beg for it? And would I have to die for it? The fact that Savita was an ethnic minority is not lost on me. She miscarried at 17 weeks. She subsequently developed sepsis, and she died because the Eighth Amendment prevented a termination before it was too late. And her death was unnecessary and very tragic. So at that time, I was part of the Galway Birth Gatherings, which is a small group bringing families and women together for birth activism, current events. We had AIMS volunteers. AIMS is the Association to Improve Maternity Services. And it was there that we started to really unpack the Eighth Amendment of what it meant in continued pregnancies and births in light of Savita's death. So I'll read to you. The Eighth Amendment was inserted Article 40.3.3 into the Irish Constitution by a referendum vote in 1983, and it states, "The state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn and, with due regard to the equal right to life of the mother, it guarantees in its laws to respect and, as far as practicable by its laws, to defend and vindicate that right." So in practice, that leaves doctors and midwives in a lot of gray areas for how to proceed in individual circumstances when something arises in wanted and continued pregnancies, particularly those with complications, but also just in practicing evidence-based care and full bodily autonomy. And also, I just want to address for anybody, younger viewers who might watch this as well, that autonomy is simply the right to govern yourself, to make decisions about yourself. So in practice, the Eighth Amendment was used as a place marker, overriding women's rights to consent or to refuse consent in treatment, meaning that a healthcare professional could deem it necessary to perform an induction of labor without, or any intervention, without any medical emergency, without considering international best practice. They could exercise their right to, quote, vindicate the right to protect the unborn, and proceed with the induction or any medical intervention without consent. There is nowhere else in our medical field to grant constitutional rights to doctors to perform a procedure on bodies without giving consent, including in death. So our medical situation, in any other medical situation, that would be an act of medical assault. It would involve the removal of their license, and it would be medical malpractice. So pregnant women in Ireland, pregnant women and people are truly second-class citizens under the Eighth Amendment. It was in 2017 that I joined Galway East for Choice. And in Galway East, every standing TD was anti-choice. We live relatively rural, and I was a mother to 3 children at that stage. It was my first time to be able to be physically involved in the repeal movement. And so being out on the streets in my local small town, it became quickly evident what was missing out on these conversations when we're talking about abortion. And that was just simply our humanity. Abortion has been part of our society since we began. And the stories that have been painted of the kind of person that has an abortion or who's deemed worthy of an abortion has been curated for centuries by the church. But so it was a conversation that I had with a gentleman in our small town at a stall in January 2018, the year of the referendum, that inspired me to create In Her Shoes. He was an older man who approached us, visibly agitated. There was 4 women at the stall, and to give us a piece of his mind. He was really not really interested in us being there. And normally, any of us would have known to move somebody on who was going to be agitated or maybe cause problems with us. So we'd move them on. But his reasonings, his questions, his irritability really felt to me like it could be broken down. Because what I know to be true of Irish people, in my experience, is that Irish people care for each other in community. And maybe that's my experience of living in the countryside, in the west of Ireland. But I've noticed that Irish people tend to be horrified by when they hear the treatment that people are receiving. They want better for everybody. And sometimes they just don't know how to go about that, or they haven't had to think about it yet because it's not directly impacted them, whether they know it or not. So I gave this man my time, and I gave him examples of real life. I listened to his questions, and then it came to, if only you could walk in her shoes. And that was just it. If only you could walk in her shoes. So I went home and I was inspired to talk to more people like him, more people who were undecided, people who had an entirely different story painted into their head of who has an abortion and what an abortion looks like. The thing is that I needed to talk to undecided voters because I needed somebody to be my vote, because I couldn't vote in the referendum. Oh my God, this cat. I'm so sorry. So the idea was very, very simple. It was a pair of shoes and an anonymous story. As an artist, artifacts of living our daily lives can be so beautiful to me. These ordinary, intimate objects that people wouldn't necessarily notice. And they can paint so much about a person. So I wanted to capture more than just a story. I wanted to paint an entire life within these shoes. And so I went home and I started taking pictures of my own shoes. And I asked in my mothering Facebook groups if anybody would like to be part of this anonymous project with me and allow me to share their story. Part of using any pair of shoes could kind of allow me to guide the reader to assume all sorts of things about the storyteller. It could inform them of maybe a socioeconomic class, their job, preconceived ideas of what clothes say about a person, and do we deem this person's abortion acceptable based on what we're seeing, this image that we've already automatically painted of who they are. Is hers the right kind of abortion? There's the freedom to play around with the images with a story, and it had the opportunity to reshape what we've been told for centuries by the church, by our society, of who has an abortion, what she looks like, what she acts like. Because the reality is that she looks like you, she looks like me, she looks like the primary school teacher, our granny, and so on. And all of these people need access to reproductive health care from all walks of life, and abortion does not discriminate. What I needed was people to hear the reality of what's talked about in closed spaces. For the focus to not be on politicians, as it had been, or the extreme opposites debating on TV and really just riling people up. I wanted to refocus to be back to those who were impacted at the center of it. And those are the women, the girls, and the people that can become pregnant. The stories were infuriating, devastating, important, and also such a privilege to hear. And I didn't feel like we could have a referendum vote on our own rights without hearing the reality of what's actually really, really happening. So the page was set up January 2018, which was 5 months before the referendum vote. And at that time, we didn't even have a date. So we didn't even know when we'd have a referendum, if it would be within the year or not. So my goal was to change just one undecided voter's mind. And my goal was to also create a safe space for storytelling, something that would be easily accessible for those that were just scrolling on Facebook, to share information that was also less polished. There were no political lines. I wasn't affiliated with any organizations. It was just me, a mom at home with my kids, talking about law reform in a way that made sense to me, and I felt could make sense to normal people without getting muddled up by law and political jargon that didn't make any sense to me and didn't feel like it had any relevance in my life. And I felt like other people would feel the same. I wanted the page to be something by the people and for the people, and that's exactly what it was. It became owned by all these storytellers and all the supporters of the page. So imagine, again, women sitting in their houses and maybe going through an experience that was not okay or was less than perfect. And they're tethered together instantly, knowing that they're not alone. And there's people that are supporting them as well. They know that their treatment in their unwanted or wanted pregnancies was not singular to them. And what a relief. What a shame that this is what has been necessary to relieve that burden and to feel connected and not alone in this experience, and that we know that we must make change. So my main focus, besides keeping the shared space sacred, keeping the storytellers protected, was to also focus on rural Ireland, because no attention was paid in the original 1983 referendum. And that's a massive reason of why the referendum was brought in, or that law was brought in the first place, because the rest of the country was left to the local parish priest to educate the people on the Eighth Amendment and abortion. Ireland was a very, very different time at that. in 1983. And so it was very, very important for me to focus there. I wanted to engage with the public on the reality of what it's like to not live in Dublin, and what we go through as a mom with no transportation. Oh God, the bins. But what we go through when we don't live in a large city. And the campaign, the Together for Yes campaign and the repeal movement felt very Dublin and city centric. So it kind of felt like we were maybe, anybody rural was maybe pushed to the outskirts. So it lost the reality of what we go through, you know, to have to travel longer distances, and not have access. So I had already known within our Galway birth gathering of how frustrating it was to try to improve our maternity services in the West. So the page started off pretty quickly, like it just all of a sudden just grew. Politicians began reading stories in the Dáil, which all of a sudden I recognized I had a great responsibility. Obviously, I had a responsibility to these women, these storytellers. I had a responsibility to ensure that their stories were protected against anybody who could infiltrate, who could find out their identities. I had to make sure that the information I was sharing as just one person was also accurate, because now it had an impact for other people. Over time, I accepted help from a trusted friend. And then soon we had a small admin team of around 5 of us. And that way we could receive the stories and have them ready for publishing, and build a small relationship if necessary with a storyteller for if they needed additional support, or just to listen to them and receive their story as a person to a person. Really trying to keep that intimate connection and knowing and respect that they're giving you something so personal, and so to meet it was what we were hoping to do. It was very, very full and intense, around the clock job. I had no idea what I was doing. We knew that we had to keep going, and all of that was on top of parenting, nightly canvassing, being on steering groups for our local Together for Yes groups. Each of the admin were doing all of this and more in their lives. So in March 2018, 2 months before the referendum vote, a Polish mother in Dublin and a friend of mine from our extended breastfeeding Facebook group days had offered to design her design services to design a booklet, a free booklet for us. So I don't know if you can see that. Let me see. Yeah, you can. Okay. So this was the booklet. Really simple. You might have seen it while you're canvassing. If you would like a copy of it, you can email me afterwards and I can send you a free copy as well. But very, very simple. So she had messaged me saying that she wanted to create a book. And so I was like, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, do you know, there was actually Ames Ireland in the West had created a free health directory booklet for the West of Ireland. And now it was only for, I think, a year. And it was it was local women. It was local activists who had gotten this put together just for the West of Ireland. And it's not in print anymore. This is outdated. But it was I loved it when I first got my hands on it. I felt like it was incredible. It had all the information I needed, and none of that was online. And it was just wonderful. So I just loved it. And I was so inspired by it. So that's what I wanted for my booklet. So I wanted it to be a free booklet to reach people who were not on social media, people who don't trust social media. I wanted them to be able to read it in their own time. I wanted it to be simple, inviting, easy to read. You know, like you look at this and nothing about it screams like abortion, that you could read it and know that nobody has to know what you're reading about either. I wanted it left in doctors' offices, in the waiting rooms, hairdressers. I imagined people going home and leaving it on their granny's table next to her crosswords and letting her, not having to have any debate, letting her just discover it. Because I knew that if she were to read these stories, that she would see herself within them. She would see her friend within them. Our older generations have these stories. They're everywhere. It was a conversation starter, and it was a safe conversation starter without having to ask somebody what they think about abortion. It's more, did you read that story last night on Facebook? Or here, I'm just going to leave you with this booklet. So I had to remain under this anti-choice radar because as the page was growing, anti-choice movements were starting to really focus in on the page and figure out who we were. I was anonymous, the admin were anonymous. They had no idea where we came from, anything about it. And sorry, my cat. So to remain under the radar, I was fundraising for money to print these on small donations in private feminist Facebook groups. And so then we got our first print run, which was incredible. And I emailed off the PDF file to every pro-choice group in the country, so that way they can print as many booklets as their fundraising could reach. Distributing across 26 counties in a kind of guerrilla style, completely grassroots way. I had created a Facebook group with a nominee from 26 counties where I would be sending them a box of booklets and they would distribute out themselves in whatever way they felt was best, making with very basic rules of don't shove them into people's faces, be respectful and kind, leave them where people can find them and read them in their own leisure. So so it was incredible to be part of, to see this chain of women and people coming together to grow booklets and move them around the country. Where I had translators from different counties translate Osceola, from different regions for the Gaeltacht regions. So we had 750 of those printed in Irish for older generations to read in their native tongues because it was important. And it was just really incredible to see. May 25th, the page had reached, May 25th was our referendum date. The page reached 4 million readers per week with zero sponsorship or advertising. It bypassed all algorithms and has since been part of a European study about social media, about how it worked and why, because it goes completely against what they teach in social media about successful viral content. But it made sense to me of why it bypassed all of those algorithms to reach the people of various ages and interests, because they're stories we can relate to, people we care about, and it could be someone we know. The referendum and the ultimate landslide win for reproductive rights happened, and everybody was celebrating, and then like, we're moving on. But I needed people to remember that they couldn't go yet. We didn't have legislation yet. Abortion was not accessible on the island of Ireland. And I also wanted to refocus our fight for decriminalization in the North. I wanted people to still get a place for information. It was the largest platform during the entire Together for Yes repeal movement. It was the largest platform combining anti-choice and pro-choice pages together. So it felt like the best place for people to get information about what they could do to ensure we got the best legislation as possible. After the Eighth Amendment was passed, politicians and lawmakers were trying to reframe the language as if the government movement was responsible for the referendum passing, and not as it being a feminist grassroots movement by the people. So it's imperative that our story is not erased. Thankfully, there's activist groups that are ensuring that Lawyers for Choice in particular, Your Own Lecture Studies, and the Digital Repository of Ireland are cataloguing the repeal, Together for Yes, In Her Shoe Stories, among other grassroots projects. My contribution to historical records is this book. It is to keep the stories of women in Ireland written in history part of Irish women's history. I chose 32 stories as a nod to 32 counties on the island of Ireland. And my intention and hope is for people around the globe to read it, to read these stories and recognize themselves in it, to see ourselves and the very real dangers of abortion being outlawed in countries, and what can happen as is happening around the world. As a collection, the book tells more than just a tapestry of what the Eighth Amendment is capable of. It tells the story of community and friendships, sisterhood, grief, and uncovering and releasing ancestral shame that has been placed on us by Ireland's church and state. And I hope to achieve that. I hope for people to know that their story matters, and that it doesn't define them, and that they can make a change. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I often feel like an imposter, and I still do. But we all have our own place. We all have our own way. We have our ideas, and together and collectively, we can change the world around us. We have that power. You know, we did a thing together, and I'm so inspired to be here with you, and know that you guys are all part of this, part of change, being a change maker, and making a difference in the world around you. So I'm so sorry that I think that was way longer than I anticipated, but if you have any questions, I would love to hear them.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was fantastic. I can feel there's some echo. So if there are questions, I suggest, because there's quite a large group, you can maybe raise your hand, or if somebody wants to go first, and then we can, I think raising hand is maybe practical so that we don't overlap with each other. I see there's one already by Orla O'Donovan, and then Charlotte. So Orla, if you want to start, and then we have Charlotte.
Sure. Hi there. Thanks very much for that, Erin. I think your work is fantastic. I've been following it for a while through my sister Maureen, who's also been active in East Galway. But listening to you, you've got me thinking about storytelling and different types of storytelling, and it reminds me of, Donna Haraway's idea, that it matters what stories we tell other stories with. But I was also struck yesterday. I started reading just the executive summary from the Commission of Investigation into the Mother and Baby Homes. And I was really struck by the opening line, which is, the story of mother and baby homes in Ireland is complex, etc., etc. So they present it as, that they too are telling a story. But unfortunately, I don't think the story, or the stories that they're telling, it's not a feminist. I don't think it's a feminist story. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your approach to storytelling, because I don't think not all storytelling helps us tell the kind of bigger stories that we as feminists want to tell. So I'm just wondering, if just in terms of your approach to In Her Shoes, just to talk a little bit about the approach to telling stories that you've been using.
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous point. I think that the difference maybe between the Commission using the word, the story, and putting this lump on years and years of massive oppression, and I think them using that, the fact that it's a governing body, I suppose, saying this is a story, and it's losing out on the individual at the core. And I suppose, so within Her Shoes and telling the stories, was that I wasn't, I didn't own it. I'm just a keeper, I suppose, of the space. So creating a safe, sacred space for people to tell their stories. And the difference there is that the women that were institutionalized and imprisoned in these homes have never been able to, are ashamed to tell their stories. There's not been a platform. They also don't know their stories, that they don't know their full story. So many things have been lost out for them that they don't know where their babies went. They don't know what's happened. So I don't know. I don't know if you're asking me of ethically, maybe, of how I got stories, or just, I think the reality is the ownership. So like the In Her Shoes Facebook page really felt like the ownership was on the people. The supporters of the page felt like it was theirs. And I also moderated the comments to ensure that the space was going to stay a safe space. So that way, if there was anybody who is anti-choice or anybody who's going to have a problem with something she said, is that she is not going to see that I wanted her to feel safe in her telling. And I wanted other people who didn't feel safe yet telling their story, or maybe they were never going to tell their story, to read the comments and not feel like they were being attacked either privately. You know what I mean? And I suppose, where has been the platform made available to our older generations of women who suffered in these institutions, and for people to listen to them without arguing? Is that space has to be created by somebody who can hold that space. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think like
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think in the Commission's report, one of the things that I think is and has caused so much controversy is that I think there's kind of questions about the stories that women have told, you know, where they say, well, there's no evidence of such and so, you know, this repeated.
Right. And like, and do we have to, like, in our stories, if this was something that happened to me, like it was the same with the abortion stories on In Her Shoes, you know, people were asking, well, where's the evidence, or this sounds made up? Well, you know, again, I would, if somebody was saying, you know, suggesting that somebody's made up their story, it's not for somebody else to decide, really. It's their own personal lived experience. And again, I think that the Commission's report, that's the state and the church, again, trying to make excuses and cover up and say this did not happen, and is discrediting women. Okay. And I don't, you know, we need a space where those stories are recorded, and there are women around the country who have written some books that have included some of their stories and are doing a lot of really important work to capture all of those. But we need more of it. Like, we need to hear those. It was the same during the repeal movement. It was hearing from our older generations. Instead of forgetting about them, it was listening to them, because they had stories that were so vitally important that we weren't getting to hear.
Thank you.
I think the next one was Charlotte, and then we have Susan and Colette.
Yes, I have a cat joining me.
We're in it together. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, my cat was moving around the keyboard a lot. I was wondering if you're also somehow involved in gathering the stories of the rural women who are somehow involved in accessing the abortion care now that it's actually implemented, or any, you know, kind of what it's like now after the repeal.
I haven't received very many stories after repeal for what legislation and what our legislation is like right now, especially for rural women. I just know that it's difficult. I know that, you know, just this last week was the very first time I've ever heard My Options advertisement on the radio while I was in a shop. And I thought that was really incredible to hear them have My Options and access to abortion, whatever, on the radio while I was in a store. Contacting, in the beginning, I contacted My Options to ensure that they were going to be advertising out west. And I was told that they have billboards and advertisements in the sides of buses and stuff. But that all sounded like it was very much in Dublin, maybe in Cork, maybe Limerick, in cities. So I kind of tried to remind them that, again, that's not here. We still don't have any GPs around me, and I'm not far from Galway City. No GPs around us offer the abortion pill.
Right.
So I don't have any collection of stories from rural women. I think that people aren't necessarily feeling like that those stories are wanted. And I'm not sure how to go about that yet. But I think it's so important for us to listen to, especially this year as our legislation is under review this year. And so it's really important for us to keep paying attention to that. I suppose that's also, you know, why making sure, like writing the book, of making sure that people still see that these are living stories. It's not history. Like, we didn't just like do this and it's history.
Exactly.
This is living right now, and especially during a pandemic. And that's interesting, is to watch like, you know, telemedicine and the availability of it, and people not being able to travel, what's happening. So I'm sure I'm not doing it at the moment. I'm sure that there are somebody, hopefully, that is doing a big study on what's happening, especially during the pandemic. You do that, Charlotte. I need you to do that. Yeah, that's your job now.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think we had Susan who wanted to ask a question.
Hi all. Thanks, Erin. So I just wanted to ask, I'm proposing to do my dissertation on gender-based violence, particularly domestic violence, and I volunteer with a women's project, Memoir, a domestic violence women's project, and I suppose as part of my dissertation, I kind of wanted to do participatory like research, you know. So, you know, obviously the issue around accessing women directly, you know, like I'd love the opportunity to be able to, you know, gather women's stories, because like I've kind of found doing the helpline, like they want to, most of the time you're just listening, like they want to tell their stories and they want to be heard, and like I think this really helps for them when they're kind of you know, building their cases for going to court. It helps them with kind of accepting the reality of it. And I just think it's really important, but obviously there's issues around kind of ethics and anonymity and, you know, just respecting their confidentiality, because a lot of them are still in the situation. So obviously their safety is paramount. But like when you were getting the stories for In Her Shoes, like how did you kind of reassure the women of anonymity, and were there challenges with this? Like, was it kind of face to face, or was it through an email, or?
That's a fabulous question. And also your project that you're wanting to work on, your dissertation, I think that is absolutely necessary, and you're absolutely right that these stories need to be told, and women are desperate to tell their stories, and just to have somebody hold it. The kind of ethics around what I did was, well, first, I let people know that they could tell that their story would be cared for anonymously, that they could send it to this email address, and that they could create a throwaway email account to send an email. Now, I know that there's better ways to do that now. There's other platforms and stuff, that maybe a Google Doc or something that maybe could be completely anonymous, to just write your story and send it. So some people would send their story, they would use an obvious throwaway email account and send it to the email address set up. And then other people, they would just ask me, if I tell my story, is it completely anonymous? And I would just let them know it was. It was just really built, I suppose, on the trust. It was built on the trust of the page, because what they had seen already on the page. Now, I imagine your storytelling wouldn't necessarily be public, but it might be. It was built on the trust that they've seen the stories go onto the page, and they've also seen the style of the page is held in a way that is cared for. So it didn't let loose on comments. There couldn't be anti-choicers or anybody picking apart their story. It was fully moderated around the clock. I also had to make sure that my email account and any of our accounts, all of our Facebook accounts, were very, very protected in the event that we were under a cyber attack, which we were. So that meant that I also had to, over a certain amount of time, delete emails to make sure that their privacy was protected, just in case we were hacked. So really, it was built on trust. I suppose really just the trust of the style of it, making sure the space is cared for. I sometimes, you know, with some people would ask, do they have to send in a picture of their shoes? And that was not part of the thing. It was, I will supply a picture, so that way some people didn't want they were afraid they'd be recognized by their shoes, you know? So that was something that I always provided, whether they wanted to send a picture or not, is I would provide that. The reassurance, I built myself and the other admin would kind of build a little bit of a relationship with people who had sent their stories. So it wasn't just you send your story off anonymously into the ether and you have no idea who's receiving it. It was being met with somebody who is reading your story and empathizing with it and responding to you personally, not with an automated message. And I think that made a difference. But that was also incredibly traumatizing and very traumatic for myself and for the other admin, who didn't have any other supports ourselves for how to handle this amount of grief and trauma that we were also taking in. So there's also part of protecting yourself in receiving those stories too, because it can be really, really horrific. Obviously, if you're working with listening to these stories from women calling in for a charity line, then you're already aware of that. Yeah, building on trust, starting small, starting in a small area around you, talking, you know, kind of having your name out there of somebody who, or a place that feels safe for people, I suppose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see there's a bunch of questions. So Colette wants to ask a question, and then Nita as well.
Thanks, Erin. So listen, congratulations and well done on the book. I got it for Christmas, so it's on the list to go through. And I just want to say to you, don't underestimate your talents. I was involved in the Together for Yes in Cork, and I observed a woman arrange a display of, I think it was 220 shoes at the courthouse in Cork. She did that in the Together for Yes office while she also had her 3 children with her. Yeah. So the extent to which women achieve, like if a guy was doing that, he would, you know, to be project managed and, you know, you would have all the jargon going with it as to the complexity of what she actually achieved, just organizing that one event. So, you know, what I say to you is you did fantastically to, you know, receive that without the proper support, without any induction, you know. So I just want to say that to you. I suppose my own story is I got involved in the 50-50 group, which was trying to get more women into elected office. That started in 2010. It didn't, I wasn't interested in running, but then in 2019, I ran in the Cork City local elections and got elected. So I'm actually an elected Green Party councillor. And so what I'd say to the people on the meeting, support women who are willing to run for public office, because being in the room makes a big difference. And the other point I wanted to make is don't let this history be silenced. I'm reading this book at the moment. I don't know if you can see it, Women and the Irish Revolution. And you can see how women are sidelined, told to be quiet, told to sit down. And not just by the church, by men who are just ignorant of their own bias. So I suppose that's the other point I'd make. And then the last thing I'd say is include men, but don't allow them to take over. So what we've done in the Green Party is we allow them to be involved in an Áglasa, but we specifically say that it's fronted by women. So often your partner, you know, minds the kids while you're doing something else. You know, so I suppose what do you do about the men is one thing is you know, galvanize them into making the change that needs to happen, but make it clear to them that, you know, they need to know their place and that it is fronted by women. So I just wanted to make those comments to you today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you know what you're saying though about women and in particular mothers being able to do everything we did during repeal. It was always like the mothers are the ones who can't get to places or can't access the meetings because they're at a bedtime or at, you know, it's a school night or it's whatever. And to me, it was, you know, and then Parents for Choice was created. It was the mothers who were doing so much work, because we're also raising the future at the same time, and we're also impacted.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like women are just incredible, so incredible. And including men is really, really an interesting, difficult one, because do they want to be involved sometimes? Or if they want to be involved, they have their ideas of how it should be done. And how do you ensure that that's created in a safe way, and also that we're not having like opportunistic men who are in our spaces to find some cute college girl to
Yes,
date. You know
that's
what I
correct.
mean? This
Yes,
kind of faux
exactly.
feminism.
Yeah. No, they
And
do need to know their place.
there are plenty of wonderful,
Yeah.
feminist men and men who are just part of these groups, and I think that it speaks volumes that they are just there. They are there on the sidelines. They are there voting with us. They don't make their voices heard. They don't take up the space. Instead, they just listen, and they vote with us.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important thing, obviously, to talk about. You know, our dads, our brothers, our partners, if they voted for, you know, to have those conversations and making sure that they know that they're voting with us, for us, and including them on those conversations, including them, and not obviously, it's a difficult one, really, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
If they know their place, they're welcome.
Yeah.
Nita had a question on men, so I'm gonna let
Okay.
Yeah, hi. I think that's a great point to start off, Colette. Thanks for bringing the men in. I was wondering, I mean, Erin, sorry, I missed the first 15 minutes of your, I am going to buy the book. But I'm also wondering, where are the men in these stories, the men who made the babies? And
Yeah.
were you able to get to them? Or even in the Tuam case, you know, the mothers and babies, think, why aren't we pursuing the men who made these women pregnant and left them to be fed, you know, by the state or the church? Or, you know,
Yeah.
why did we let them go? Why can't we rope them in now also at this stage, because they're alive? I know a couple of cases, women in their 60s who have recently found out, you know, the children that they left behind before, you know, the ones they, I mean, after they got married, before they got married, they had the babies and they had given up for adoption, and now one of them actually has come back and trying to trace his mother. And the trauma of it all, you know, and suddenly in your 60s, your lost child, the one you've tried to forget, you know, you've tried to forget, is back in your life. It's very difficult to accept that. And I see that struggle right now with a white Irish friend. And I'm just wondering, why did the men go scot-free? Why are we letting them go scot-free, even, you know, as late as the 1990s or now? We should bring them in. And we should
Absolutely.
name and shame them if that's the way to go. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. Completely agree. I suppose within the stories, the reason why men, so in these stories, there's not very many men talked about, because at the center of it, I want to create, it needs to be a space for her experience, for her to tell her story. The central person who is impacted by the Eighth Amendment is the person who becomes pregnant. So the men absolutely need to be accounted for. It's also not our responsibility to make them do the work. They should want to do the work, and for us to have to create the spaces for them is us creating that space for ourselves to heal and to be able to have our own truth in our space, and then also having to make the space and manage it for them too, and make them do that work. And I don't think that's really fair to place on us to have to do that work as well, you know. During repeal, I had contacted some of the men's groups to ask them to be involved with In Her Shoes, if any of them had any stories to share, any of this kind of stuff. And there was a handful that would engage and listen in a really nice, good way. And there were others who wouldn't, because they had their own agenda, their own political mindset. It wasn't a feminist issue to them necessarily. It was, I don't know, you know, right now, of holding men accountable. like we've been trying to do that forever. And I suppose it's right now people asking those questions. Well, where are the men? You know, where are the men? Why aren't they talking about this? But we also can't make them do that. And so right now, I think what we can focus on, so whether we want to intentionally keep that coming up and saying, well, where are the men? Where's the dads? Who are these men that put them in these institutions? Is for us to also just have our spaces where we can talk about what's happened with ourselves and not have to even think about how to enact change in these men. I think for me, I'm a mother to, I have one son. For me, it's my responsibility and my duty and my husband's responsibility to ensure that I'm raising a son in the world who is witnessing, learning, and experiencing all this. So that way this isn't a question in the future. So that way this is somebody who is growing up as a feminist in the world to understand these issues. And so that way we're not having to call on our future men to go like, well, where are you? But that they're being raised currently by these women around us to be better people. I don't know if that, I can't answer your question really, because where the fuck are the men, really?
No, I was only curious about the men. I mean, the women you interviewed, surely they knew who the men were.
Well, some of them, you know, their partners would have been with them. Some of the stories are continued pregnancies, and some of the stories are wanted pregnancies. Some of the stories are their husband was there with them, or their boyfriend was very supportive. But the I didn't want the focus to be on men.
Not sure. True.
You know, like I wanted the space, because men are they're always part of the space, and wanting a space that is just the women. And yeah, I do know men that are very fantastic as well, and that shared their experience of witnessing their partner go through an abortion, or what they experienced.
I did go to Liverpool in 2015, so I know that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
You know, and we there was only a handful of partners on the Facebook page who had shared their experience, and it was really lovely, and a lot of people were really happy to see a man share his experience of what he witnessed his partner go through.
Yeah.
And I think it's helpful for us to hear those too, to also understand the grief for a father losing a child that was much wanted but couldn't be.
Yeah, that was the case. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Anyway, thanks. I am going to buy the book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nita. We have, I'd say, 2 more questions. One from Doris, one from Anna.
I'll try to talk really fast.
We're gonna have to close the discussion, but yeah, what you said about the men, and I think for me, when I was reading the page, what I found really striking was how the 8th Amendment was really affecting healthcare in a broad way, right? Even women who were not there for an abortion or were not pregnant, they were still being affected in terms of consent and in terms of treatment by the whole architecture of the 8th Amendment. So that I found really striking, and how, you know, the whole campaign was basically showing how the 8th Amendment was hindering women's health as a whole. I think that your page made it very clear. We have a question from Doris, was one of the students who also involved you in her dissertation. We had Maggie as well, who left a comment thanking you for being part of her dissertation. So thank you so much for helping our student as well with her dissertation on the repeal movement. I'm going to leave the word to Doris and then to Anna, and then after your response, I think we're going to have to close it. I'll have to run to pick up my daughter at crash. So I'll let Doris speak, and Anna, and these are the last questions for now.
Okay. So making it very short, Erin, thank you so much for the book, and thank you so much for sharing with us your story. I think it really, you know, this book wouldn't have been the half of it without your story, and I'm so grateful. You know, it was so deep, so intimate to read it. But I have my question is a partly private question. Of course, you know, you have said everything you wanted to say in the book, but just one short question. What do you read? Like novels?
What do I read?
Was there a novel, maybe an Irish novel, which impacted you deeply before the whole story started, like In Her Shoes? And because, you know, I have this experience of getting to know the Irish people through literature.
Mm.
I have this vision of Irish people as, you know, being not only very talk active on any occasion and eager to share those stories. And it was, you know, for me as an outsider, I was really shocked. How is it possible that you have a country of people who would just, you know, approach you on the street and say, hey, hello, where are you from? And then after 15 minutes, you know the whole story of their life and the names of the grandkids and everything. After half an hour, you are invited for a dinner. So, and then on the other hand, you have so much, you know, hidden stories somewhere under the carpet, in the cupboard. Actually, I imagine, you know, the whole apartments being like, you know, you have packed the stories everywhere you could actually, just to keep them away from other people. So I think about the loneliness.
Yeah.
And if I may share also a personal story, the book really changed. There are two books that really changed my way of thinking about Ireland. One was Room by Emma Donoghue, because I think it's really very metaphorical. There is a metaphor in it, a very deep one. And the other one was the Secret Scripture by Sebastian Barry, which also made me think about, you know, stories kept somewhere under, you know, the floor, people wanting to tell the story, keeping them somewhere within them, but not letting them go. Right? So
Yeah.
maybe it was the starting point of In Her Shoes, that you just, you know, gave them the space.
You know, one of the books that has stayed with me forever, and it's in particular about women's stories and storytelling and ancestral knowledge, is The Red Tent. Just hearing of that was kind of the first book I've ever read, I suppose, that was deciding to look for the women in history. Look for the women, like we haven't heard their stories, and why to kind of reckon. It was the first time I ever kind of went, oh, where are the women? So that was really, that was like, you know, long ago that I read. But I think for you, a really great book I think you would enjoy, it came out last year by Rosita Sweetman, Feminism Backwards. Yeah. Because it also talks about Ireland in an entirely different time, and she was one of the founders of the Irish women's liberation movement. And I thought it was really fascinating for me, of a different generation and from a different country, to learn about Ireland through her way of writing, and learning about the Catholic Church as well. So I thought it was really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Erin. We're gonna have a chapter from that book for in the reading list for students for the second semester, when they're gonna do their Active Press exercise in the Bull Library. They're gonna look for the archive in the Active Press and find some sources there of women's second wave feminism. So that's gonna be a good suggestion. I'm not sure if Doris wanted to still ask something or say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say hi, Erin, and thank you for talking. Great to see you. Yeah, I kind of put my question in just in case I didn't get a chance to say it, but basically just about the importance of women's stories and how frustrating it was to see that report that they say, oh, there's no evidence of any of these things. Like, you know, how can you discount all of these women's stories and, you know, the children and that. So yeah, just I suppose to say thank you for writing down all the stories of In Her Shoes and Repeal, and just as you know, I was involved with Pro-Choice Wexford, and we found your leaflets just to be so helpful on the doorsteps, you know, because they weren't pushing an agenda, I suppose, obviously. And so yeah, just that allowance of stories and allowing space for people to tell their stories is fabulous. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Women just want to tell their stories. We need to, and it's forever that we've been discredited and been told that we need evidence and proof to back up our lived experiences, and we just hopefully that'll end at some point, but and that we can just be listened to and just taken at face value of this is our experience, and just leave it at that, and listen to us and learn from us. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing as well. Yeah, it's absolutely been such an honor to listen to these women's stories, and still today to hear women's stories and their experiences, and it's inspiring to me to know that that the booklet that we did and that the book that's written right now is being received as I hoped, that it's important, and that these stories are being kept forever, and hopefully this year in our legislation that we have good legislation, and that the North can have access to abortion, and that other countries around the world who are still experiencing the same things, their stories are heard as well, and make the change that we need. Yeah, thank you. I just now can see there's the conversation over there on the side, these notes that I didn't see any of during. And one person had asked just there real quick, I don't know how to pronounce your name because it's Irish. Cleona?
Where can we buy the
Here, can we buy the book? If you, I just wanted to say briefly that if you wanted to buy the book from New Island Books, that's my publisher, that a portion of the proceeds goes to Women's Aid. Otherwise, you can buy it in any good Irish bookshop. I would obviously suggest supporting local and independent bookstores if you can. Otherwise, you can buy anywhere online. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. It was a fabulous webinar, I'd say, and you have many compliments in the chat, as you can see, and many expressions of praise. And
so much.
Thank you so much for your work, and also for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. We're going to have to close the session, but I encourage you all to join us for our next webinar, which will be in February. And we're going to talk about one-parent families during the COVID pandemic. So it's going to also be a very important topic once again. So thank you so much, Erin. Thanks, everybody, for your questions. And have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Erin.
Thank you.